very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to the second plenary event on this Industrial Day, which is supported by the Industrial Relations Committee, the Human Spaceflight Committee, and the Commercial Spaceflight Safety Committee. I'm very happy that we have this broad support of technical committees for this plenary event. And this topic is going to be to talk about alternative ways to train astronauts, different types of astronauts, different ways of getting up there in orbit or suborbit. And I'm very happy that we have a very interesting panel, quite a large panel, very diverse panel, from governmental through commercial to even administrative representatives. And I'm very happy to see that this spurs such a large interest here among you. And I would like to welcome on stage first our moderator and introduce Mrs. Brianna Henwood. She's Director of Business Development of the ETC Center and NASTAR. Excellent. Brianna, please take the stage and introduce our panelists. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone. We have an all-star panel for you today, so this is really, really exciting. And I'm glad you guys are all here in Australia. This is a wonderful country, so I'm very excited to be here. It's my first trip as well. So as Christian mentioned, this panel is going to really be talking about government and private space flight and kind of the differences, but really from the astronaut point of view. So what are the astronauts going to be doing on each of these various missions? So just a very quick background about myself, and then I'll introduce the panelists. My background is a little bit undersea and then also in the spaceflight world. So I was working with human performance and on different missions below the surface, and then came to work at the National Aerospace Training and Research Center, where that center has developed a program for training future astronauts. And we were privileged to work with Virgin Galactic and several other companies in modeling the profile for both suborbital and also for orbital missions, including the Atlas V. And from using things like high-performance centrifuges and altitude chambers, we were able to look at the various population groups from 18 years of age to 88 years of age that might be going into space. And so several research studies have been published related to who can go to space safely. But not only just the training, but also the various other ways that we can train those for space flight, including virtual reality, as you see, and some other mechanisms. This is not going to be 50 ways to go to space. Right now we're going to have 4 ways to go to space. But let me introduce the panelists who are going to talk about that. So I think first off we have Richard DeBello from Virgin Galactic. Richard, you come up in this, or Rich? He is the Vice President for Business Development and Governmental Affairs. He was also formerly at the White House Office of Science and Policy and also Intelsat, so welcome, Rich. Secondly, we have Blue Origin, Ariane Coronel. She's the head of astronaut strategy and sales, and she was also the head of the Space Generation Advisory Council. So welcome, Ariane. Both of these are suborbital providers today. Third up, from Boeing, we have Chris Ferguson. He's a 3-time shuttle astronaut and currently the director of crew and mission systems at Boeing. Welcome, Chris. Next up, we have Tony from Lockheed, Tony Antonelli. He is also a 2-time shuttle astronaut. He's the director for space systems, civil and commercial. We have the Dr. George Neal from the FAA, Office of Commercial Spaceflight Transportation. Dr. George Neal needs no introduction. He's already been speaking here today. Thank you very much for coming, George. Last up, we have Pam Melroy. Pam is also a 3-time shuttle astronaut. She's also worked for Lockheed and for the FAA AST. She is a strategic advisor on space for NOVA. So welcome. At the end, I'm gonna have each panelist speak for a couple minutes about their company and really want you guys to talk about the perspective from your astronaut training and also safety program. What is that like, and what can future folks like all of us look forward to if we were to fly on each of your vehicles. So I'll have you guys speak for a little bit on that, and then at the end, we have a fun surprise for you guys all as well, so stick around. I'm going to have Richard speak first.
Okay, well, it's great to be here today. I think I have some slides, which I promise I'll click through very quickly. The slides are just to sort of remind people what the Virgin Galactic Spaceflight System looks like. Do we have a clicker of some kind or remote? Can I operate? Or? That is a very large box, indeed. Okay, well, just a quick profile here. We have an air launch system that is designed to take a spaceship up to about 40,000 feet. Then the engine ignites, flies to space, flies to about 100 kilometers, provides a brilliant view of the Earth and about 4 minutes of microgravity, and then glides down to Earth. That's the overview. So just to sort of show that in real-life pictures, this is the White Knight, which is the carrier vehicle carrying the spaceship. The next slide shows that once they get to altitude, the spaceship drops. The engine then ignites, burns for about 3 minutes, goes up to about 100 kilometers, and then you would get this view as you were floating in space. And then the spacecraft deploys its tail up, which acts a little bit like a badminton cock in that it orients the spacecraft back down to Earth and also bleeds off some of the energy. When you get down to about 30,000 foot, the tail straightens out again and it glides down like a glider and lands on a runway. Commercial operation, although testing today is being done in Mojave, California, commercial operations will be at our spaceport in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and we hope to be moving there next year. We're also doing some research, which is not really relevant to this topic, except it has, if you can see, we can reorient the cockpit to allow there to be a payload specialist who would actually fly with the research mission. And so what's going on in the program? We are finishing our glide flight test. We're about to begin powered flight, which means we actually light the engine this time. And then we're going to move the team down to New Mexico and to begin commercial operations. So that's a very quick overview of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think just to say a few words, actually, Brianna, you did acknowledge that we have been working together for years with NASTAR and some of our early we call them future astronauts or spaceflight participants. Some of our early customers have gone through the NASTAR program and have experienced the increased Gs that come with that program in the centrifuge. And we also will have, the typical profile will be that a customer will come 3 or 4 days before the flight. There'll be a 3-day training program. There'll be a familiarization with the aircraft and all the systems. There will be they will meet their crew. They will meet their fellow passengers. They will, of course, get fitted for a very snazzy-looking Virgin flight suit. And they'll have interviews, private consultations, and medical screening will all happen in that period. There'll be a mock-up on the ground of the spaceship, which they will work in to understand the whole flight profile so that they understand when they can get out of their seat during the flight. And this process, hopefully, we will be starting next year. And I don't want to consume all the time, so I'll just be quiet and pass it to Ariana.
Rich, before you go, can you talk a little bit about how you came to develop this training program? Has it just been your ideas, or are you adhering to any safety standards or training standards?
Oh, I think we have, we are blessed with a great staff, and a lot of people. We have veterans of the Space Shuttle program. We have employees with very, very deep background in experimental aircraft, high altitude aircraft, We have an astronaut. I mean, so we are the collective staff is very, very deep in experience in spaceflight. But I should say, and probably the most important thing I should say, is we are not trying to replicate what NASA does. From the very beginning, from day one of this program, Richard Branson's vision was that he wanted to democratize access to space. He wanted regular people to be able to fly. So we're not looking for superheroes. We're looking for regular people who want to go to space and experience it. So what we're trying to do is create an experience that can be shared with people of all different ages, shapes, sizes, and fitness level. And I know that we are certainly, in our profile of customers, certainly represent that. And we think that's an important thing that we're doing, and it's a specific objective of this program. I know that Richard Branson has personally talked with drawing a blank, brilliant physicist, Stephen Hawking, who wants to fly. God, look at Stephen Hawking. Anyway, yeah, he's personally talked to Stephen Hawking, who expressed an interest in flying, and if his health will allow it, he intends to fly. So,
thank you very much. Ariane, would you care to share the details of Blue Origin?
Sure, my pleasure. Well, thank you, Brianna, for the invitation to share a little bit about our astronaut program, some of the developments, but maybe I should start with Blue Origin. If you don't mind. So our vision is millions of people living and working in space. Obviously, that's not going to happen tomorrow. We recognize that. Our motto at Blue Origin is Gradatum Ferociter, or step by step ferociously. And so the first and very important step in that is our suborbital program and our suborbital rocket, New Shepard. I hope you all have seen our launches and webcasts and videos that we've put out because we're very proud of the system. New Shepard was the first rocket to fly into space over 100 kilometers and to come back and land. You see, this is our flight from November of 2015, the first time that we did that. But just as importantly, if not more importantly, that same piece of hardware flew 4 more subsequent times for a total of 5 flights on this rocket. We're very proud of that fact. But that is step one, and then the next step is ultimately we'll be flying people on this rocket. We're already flying payloads, but we will be putting people on this rocket in the next year or two. So what does that flight look like? The capsule sits on top of the booster. The 2 lift off, and at about 75 kilometers, the capsule separates from the booster. And right about there is where you're going to start to feel your 0 Gs. So you're going to continue up over 100 kilometers. And we're going to let you unbuckle, get out of your seat. There are 6 seats, 6 windows. You see those windows there? Those are the largest windows that will have ever flown in space. Over a third of the capsule is windows. So, you know, when you're floating in space and doing some somersaults, you're going to feel like you are floating in space. I will also, if you note here, some of the seats that are in there, those are in-house designed seats. They're based on a helicopter model. You're in a reclined position. That's really nice when you're taking the Gs on the way up. You max at about 3 Gs on the way up and about 5 Gs just momentarily on the way down. So it's nice that it disperses those Gs. The booster is going to race you back home. So New Shepard comes in. Those drag brakes at the top end pop out at about 20,000 feet. At about 3,600 feet, the BE3 engine relights. It's a deeply throttleable LOX hydrogen engine, and it comes in for a very nice soft landing. Meantime, you will still be floating up there. It's a full 11-minute flight, but at apogee, about 4 minutes of which is when you're going to get your 0 G experience. We're going to get you back in your seat. You're going to come down under 3 parachutes, And just at the last second, our retro thrust system at the base of the capsule will fire to slow down your landing to just about 1 or 2 miles per hour. So in fact, it's a relatively soft landing. It kicks up dust out at our site in West Texas, but it's a nice soft landing, especially with those seats that I mentioned. So we're looking forward to flying the next tail of New Shepard by the end of the year. We're excited about this new rocket, but also we're excited about the new capsule because the next capsule will actually have the windows on it. If you've seen our flights before, those windows were just painted on, so you can see just the relative scale of those ginormous windows. But it's a really important next step. When it comes to the training program, if you were to come fly with us on a Wednesday, you'd fly into West Texas about a day and a half in advance, get to meet the rest of the passengers that will be flying with you, as well as the Blue Origin team that's going to be training you on the day before flight. So it'll be 1 day of intense but fun training. We're going to go over, of course, ingress, egress, emergency procedures. We want to make sure that our customers feel comfortable for anything that might happen. We also go over what we call zero-G etiquette, making sure that that you have a comfortable flight as well as your crewmates. I should note, as you saw there in the video, you will be in a flight suit. It's not a pressure suit. It's a shirt sleeve environment. You won't be wearing shoes like this. That can get a little out of hand. We'll give you some nice soft shoes in addition to teaching you about zero-G etiquette. And so that's the key behind our training program. It's compact. We think it's going to cover exactly what you need for the 11 minutes. And to tie it back to this idea of millions of people living and working in space, we're working on our rocket. You might have heard about this operational reusability that we build into the rocket, but also from the perspective of flying people, how do we get that process down to, as Rich mentioned as well, so that we can democratize space, we can open it up to millions of people, and that also is how we build it into the training program as well. So that's the overview, and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So well done. So just to recap really briefly, the Blue Origin flight is 11 minutes, and the training program will start about a day and a half ahead of time, correct? That's correct. And the Virgin Galactic flight is about 2 hours? It's
about 2 hours from takeoff to landing.
2 hours or so from takeoff to landing, and then this training will start about 3 days ahead of time.
Yes, 3 days.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Chris.
Okay, so we've heard from two of our suborbital ways to get space. Boeing's offering is a little bit different in that we're serving our flagship customer, which is NASA. So in essence, Boeing is building a spacecraft that performs the function that the Space Shuttle did a few short years ago, to take American and international partner astronauts to the International Space Station and return them 6 months later. So it's fully orbital flight. Zero-G doesn't last 4 minutes. It lasts as long as you want it to until you do a deorbit burn and return back. And we'll be getting ready for spaceflight next year. So let's tell you a little bit about where we are. First, some of Boeing's model in space. You know, just because you've done something in the past doesn't entitle you to continue to do it in the future. But Boeing and its heritage companies have been involved in human space flight since there was human space flight, back from the days of the X-15. And then you see as the latter end of the timeline there, SLS Space Launch System, which will ultimately be the lift vehicle that takes us to Mars and beyond. The Starliner, which is our program that we're talking about here. And then Next Step, which is that intermediate waypoint en route to Mars. But we've been in this business a long time, but we realize that there's a lot of new entrants in the club, and it doesn't entitle us to do it forever, but we intend to remain here as we have in the past. The Starliner will launch on an Atlas V vehicle. Atlas V has been very successfully serving the world for about 17 years now. It's got close to 80 successful flights under its belt. Just last week it launched Enroll 42 out of the west coast of the United States, a reconnaissance satellite. And the vehicle itself, the spacecraft itself, is designed for 7 people. We built it ultimately to carry 5 because the NASA mission only wants 4. So that extra seat, that 5th seat, can be used for either cargo or perhaps for a paying passenger. And of course, we need to work very closely with our International Space Station partners, which ultimately is our destination, to coordinate and make sure that they would welcome spaceflight participants or perhaps international partner astronauts on board as well. We have a contract right now with NASA to conduct a full cradle-to-grave program. We're doing full development of the spacecraft, right, the payload that takes the astronauts to the space station, and to integrate that with the Atlas V launch vehicle. There will be some minor modifications to the Atlas V, and that includes the incorporation of an emergency detection system that I'll talk about in just a moment. Our requirements are, as I said, to deliver NASA astronauts to space. So our training program is a little bit different. It's a little bit longer. And we keep in mind that the astronauts that we are training are predominantly training to perform a 6-month mission on the space station, and that our ride that we provide to them is really just a function that gets them there and gets them back. So we try to keep it fairly concise. And you can see our timeline there. We're busy. We're in the thick of testing right now with the intent of flying at least our uncrewed test flight next year, and ideally both our uncrewed and our crewed test flight. We're building the modules in a former shuttle processing facility on the eastern coast of Florida by the Kennedy Space Center. We're doing our testing all over the United States, and we'll mention just a little bit about that in a moment. And we intend to fully train the astronauts at the Johnson Space Center, so it'll be a very familiar astronaut or training environment for astronauts as it was for me and Tony in our former lives. And Pam, I'm sorry, drawing a blank.
Is that you?
No, but actually, this is. I did find that there is a future for retired astronauts, and it is in the function of crash test dummy testing. But what you're seeing here is, and Tony, I reserved that job for you, but it did take me about a week to get that little orange and black dot off my forehead. But what you're seeing here is a part of our end-to-end safety testing. Again, this is mandated by NASA. We do land on land like our predecessors. We don't, not on a runway, but we do actually cushion our final landing, unlike a retro type system that Blue Origin uses. We use airbags to cushion the final landing, but we must be prepared for about any surface that could be underneath us. So we have unusual attitudes that we could prepare for. We could even land in water if we have to. We never designed the vehicle to do so. But we did a lot of testing to make sure that there is no flail injury for the participant. Let's see. We mentioned training. A lot of emphasis on training. Unlike some of the suborbital entrants in this business, our training program is a little deeper because, again, we're training them to be the commander of the crew. The vehicle is really autonomous, so it can actually seek and find and dock with the International Space Station autonomously, but NASA has been kind enough to bestow a requirement on us that the astronaut must be able to take over from the automation at any time and successfully execute the balance of the mission. So in many ways, that actually makes it more challenging in that the astronaut not only has to understand what has to be done to do the job, but has to understand how the automation intends to do the job. And that's why we have our training facilities at the Johnson Space Center. We have 2 part task trainers that are largely touchscreen based. You see Eric Bowe working one of them in the upper left. In the lower left, we have a full-up mission simulator that gives the astronauts that full-up immersive experience that they would have, including sound and tactile feel and the full environment that you would expect inside the vehicle. We have a mock-up so they can practice insertion and extraction activities, emergency egress activities, and we even built a boilerplate mock-up to serve just in case we land in the water so that the government rescue forces can rescue the crew. A lot of maturity right now in terms of testing. We're testing coast to coast. In the right image, this is the first time we've actually joined the crew module to the service module at our West Coast facility, and we're going through modal testing right now. Our thrusters are being tested at the White Sand Test Facility, as you see in the center. Off to the left, we are in the middle of what we call parachute system qualification test, where we drag one of our boilerplate test articles up to 40,000 feet under a helium balloon, release it, and let it go through all of the recovery activities all the way to landing. And then, as you see in the chart, we have a fairly significant test next year, a pad abort test, and we'll conduct that at the White Sands Test Facility. So it's a very busy year of testing for us. Again, the focus is on safety, a lot of safety enhancements. I mentioned one of them earlier called the Emergency Detection System. It's one of the modifications that we made to the Atlas V. It's essentially a self-testing diagnostic capability that measures how the booster rocket is performing. And if anything should go awry very quickly, there will not be enough time for the crew to react themselves. So we will, in effect, use our abort system. The launch vehicle will tell the crew module to abort, and at which time it will use the equivalent of an ejection seat for a rocket to propel itself away to land safely in the water where they can be recovered by government rescue crews. Of course, with that is the full-up launch abort system. It's a pusher abort system. It consists of 4 liquid-powered engines that can propel us away if need be. We also have an evacuation system on the launch pad, and then we're designed for landing in all sorts of environments, ideally on land, but potentially in water as well. I mentioned NASA is our flagship customer, and our primary objective is to get them back and forth to the space station. There are potential business opportunities that lie in the future, but we're going to get our primary customers going before we embark on that. And I promise this is just a short, and there's some audio with this if you want to turn it up. If not, you're going to have to listen to me the whole time. Very good.
At this point, we are witnessing something that we're all going to remember decades from now. This is a point in history that reflects a new era in human spaceflight.
I know many of you have had the opportunity to dock our simulator outside. It's actually that easy in real life, so we'd love to have you on board someday. Thanks.
Thank you. That was a great video, Chris. I'm excited. Who's hands up? Who wants to go? Should we go now? Yeah? Okay, good. So one question for you here. You mentioned there's a 5th seat, right? We're all interested in that 5th seat. Who can fulfill that 5th seat? International? Domestic? How are you going to pick that?
Well, it's a great question. A lot of it actually depends on our ISS partner. And why I say that is because we ideally don't want to send the 5th seat customer up to the International Space Station for a full 6 months, nor do I think the ISS wants them for a full 6 months.
Why not?
So the idea is to get them up there, allow them to experience a couple weeks of International Space Station life and bring them back home again. So the question is, how are we going to alternate vehicles? Of course, we're not the only one in this business. SpaceX is also in this business. So what we call a direct handover, all right, our ability to go up, allow someone to spend some time, and then bring them down on a different vehicle, so we limit their time on board, is probably going to drive who occupies that seat. So, but otherwise, it's for sale, Brianna. I don't know if you're into this kind of thing. I certainly am. But everything has its price, and if we don't take a passenger, we'll take cargo. But the nice thing is, it's an enticement. It's out there. There's interest. Not only within the United States, but across the globe, and we'd love to fill that seat with a passenger, I'll call them a spaceflight participant, soon on a trip up to the ISS.
Ah, good question. So would they still be a spaceflight participant if they pick the 5th seat?
That's a good question. I don't know. We'll work that.
We'll get
details that later.
I'll have George fill that one. All right, Tony.
All right, I'm going to stand up and scoot to the front because Brianna asked you a question and I couldn't see all the hands. Who here wants to fly in space? All right, not everybody's hands up, which is okay. I will tell you, though, that NASA, so far, ESA, JAXA, Roscosmos, they're not picking anybody that doesn't raise their hand. I know for Virgin's standpoint, they're not picking anybody that doesn't put down a deposit. But so one of those things, right, you're going to have to do if you really want to go. If you don't want to go, you know, sitting on your hands is a safe move. For those of you that do want to go, what's it about flying in space? Who here wants to ride a rocket ship? Wow, that was more than I thought. I suggest you guys go back and look at a modern rocketry. Anyway, moving on. Who here wants to experience weightlessness, float, fly? You saw the video. Yeah, that's a good number. It turns out, I don't know, I haven't asked Fergie and Pambo, that's one of the coolest parts about space flight. That was the most surprising. I have no idea why floating and flying is so much fun, but it's just terrific. All right, let's see. Who wants to look down upon Earth from space? Yeah, that should be everybody. Even if you don't want to fly in space, you should still want to do that. It's fantastic. Who wants to set foot on another world? Moon, Mars, anywhere else? Wow. And then the last one. Who wants to survive the return trip back to Earth to live and tell about their journey, right? That's a key piece. So it turns out Lockheed Martin is the industry partner with NASA building the Orion spacecraft. We got EM1, Exploration Mission 1, and uncrewed test flight coming up real soon, and then we'll switch to crewed flights. They're going to go out past the moon, so farther than humans have traveled, another 70,000 kilometers farther than the Apollo missions went. And then we're going to build up NASA's Deep Space Gateway. Fergie had it on his charts. It was called Next Step. They're kind of this synonymous. We're going to build a cislunar Deep Space Gateway so that we can build up the infrastructure and the operational experience to build up the deep space transport to go on trips to Mars. Round trip to Mars, you're talking about 3 years. So I know the two questions that are coming, right? How long are you going to experience weightlessness? For these first missions, orbiting Mars Science Laboratory, like 3 years of weightlessness. And then how long's the training? That's the second question, right? Sure. It is your entire life. So it's everything you've done to date, and it's everything you're going to do before you go on this mission. Who here's changed a flat tire on their bicycle or car? Yeah, so that's part of your training. You're going to need those kind of skills to be able to do this kind of mission. Another key piece of an orbiting science laboratory in Mars orbit is low latency telerobotics, right? You can drive the rovers now from orbit with just a short enough delay that will enable you to do all kinds of scientific exploration at a pace that in 6 to 9 months in Mars orbit, you can do more Mars science than we've done in 40 years on the surface of Mars. However, here's the key piece. You got to bring the scientific mind, kind of scientific method to Mars orbit, or you're not going to take advantage of the low latency, right? So you got to know how to change a flat tire, as well as, and that's my analogy for repairing anything on board, right? All of the systems on board are going to need preventative maintenance. That's going to be a regular part of the trip. 3-year trip in weightlessness is going to require physical fitness training. So not just training to go on the mission, but during the mission. And guess what? If the exercise equipment breaks, you're not getting new pieces, right? You're going to have to figure out a way to fix what you have with what you have. The mission's going to be international. So who here speaks a second language so far? Right, again, the part of your lives that you spent learning a second language, that's part of the training for this mission. And then the last piece, and the most important, because I didn't see anybody that was raising their hands for the first set of questions. If you raised your hand for the last question, right, you want to return alive back on Earth and tell the tale of your adventure, you've got to be ready to deal with whatever contingencies happen during this emergency, right? So Orion is designed with strict NASA standards for human rating requirements for deep space, including radiation storm shelter and things that we just never designed in the spacecraft before Orion. So she's equipped to keep you alive for weeks and keep you safe and allow you the time to figure out whatever contingency situation presents itself on your 3-year mission. I'm convinced it's not going to be if you have one. I'm convinced it's going to be when and which type on a deep space mission of that length. So you got to be ready to solve real-world problems with a ticking clock. And so same thing. Everything you've done your whole life would prepare you for this mission. I know Rich thinks you can't go, right? He thinks, somebody used the word normal people. I can't remember who used that. I consider myself a normal person. Normal people can go into outer space. Fergie, Pam, are y'all normal or you're not sure? Sosa? This is something you can do, right? Depending on where you are in your career, this is certainly opening up space tourism to a broader population is really going to ignite the excitement of space travel. Looking down at Earth from 100 kilometers is going to change your perspective of Earth in ways that you probably won't really understand until you experience them. And then having, and I don't get to pick, I know you were raising your hand for me, I don't get to pick which one of you gets to set foot on Mars, but that's going to be game-changing for all of us. And so, especially for the students, right, focusing on the STEM subjects, again, everything you do your whole life will be training for this mission, and don't be shy about raising your hand. If you want to hear more about this Mars Base Camp vision, it'll be early Friday morning right here in C. So come back Friday morning and we'll tell you more about Mars Base Camp.
Thanks so much, Tony. Tony answered all our questions, so thank you, Tony. Let's hear from George. We've kind of increased in risk a little bit as Tony then explained some of the other dangers, especially re-entry and radiation, et cetera. But maybe you can talk about the regulatory environment a little bit and some of these safety risks.
Sure, I'd be happy to. This is a really exciting time for commercial space transportation. And in fact, I think we're coming up on what may someday be referred to as a golden age of human spaceflight. One of the reasons for that is we're in the middle of a significant transformation between a time when the government did it all, pretty much, to a time when private industry is playing an increasingly important role. And just look at what's happening right now. There are 6, count them, human-rated spacecraft under development. We've heard about several of them here, but there's a couple others. Lockheed's Orion, Boeing Starliner 100, got the SpaceX Dragon, Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser. We've got Blue Origin's New Shepard and Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2. All under development now. Pretty exciting time. But as we do that, I think it'll be important for us to keep in mind some observations from our Congress in the US, which is space transportation is inherently risky. And the future of the industry is going to depend on our ability to continually improve the safety performance. So take a look at the record now. In the US, we have had 375 human space flights over the years. And 4 of those, 1 X-15, 2 shuttle, and 1 Spaceship 2, have ended in a fatal accident. So that's about a 1% fatal accident rate, about 10,000 times more risky than the record of a typical commercial airliner. So that's something we want to improve upon. If you look at the human spaceflight regulations that we've got at the FAA, it's pretty much a very concise, top-level performance-based set of regulations. Pilots need to have an FAA pilot's license with an instrument rating, plus the knowledge and experience to control the vehicle. Safety-critical members of the flight crew need to have at least a second-class FAA medical. Spaceflight participants fly under informed consent, so they have to understand the risk that they're taking and sign on the dotted line and that they're willing to accept those risks. And although not as currently required, we're encouraging the designers, developers, the operators of these systems to at least think through all of the recommended practices for human spaceflight occupant safety that we put out in a publication a few years back. So we've identified some important areas for the companies to think about and decide how they want to address. If you look at the overall process of regulatory oversight right now, FAA licenses, but basically only focuses on keeping this uninvolved public safe. In the future, when Congress repeals the moratorium on new regulations and we have industry consensus standards in place, I think we could well see occupant safety as part of the overall license. Way downstream, once spaceflight becomes more routine and we have a lot more data to deal with, I think it's likely we'll end up with some kind of a certification process similar to what we have in aviation. Frankly, I think that's decades away right now. Meanwhile, there's companies not just building rockets, but doing training. And Brianna talked about some of those. NASTAR's got a centrifuge. You can go altitude chamber training. You can buy a ticket to fly parabolic aircraft trajectories to experience weightlessness about 30 seconds at a time. You can even sign up with Waypoint to Space and try on a spacesuit and see what an EVA might be all about. An important part of training at NASA has always been their T-38 program, where both pilots and mission specialists got frequent flights in a high-performance aircraft. Well, I'll tell you, there are private individuals and companies right now that have high-performance aircraft. The catch is that under current U.S. law and regulation, you can't use those aircraft in a training mission for spaceflight and have compensation or higher. They're considered experimental aircraft, and that's not allowed. So we think that's something that Congress ought to take another look at. Maybe the National Space Council can encourage a revisit to that issue, because this type of training can really help in terms of being prepared for your future space flights. So that's a quick look at things from the government perspective. We think the combination of the FAA licensing process and the informed consent regime that we're under has successfully balanced ensuring public safety while still allowing the innovation and creative design that we're seeing so much in industry. Someday, we might need some additional regulations to respond to what we learn. In the meantime, love to see industry standards, sharing mishap data when things go wrong, and cooperating on safety type issues, plus the kinds of training that we've been talking about here. So I look forward to your questions, but in the meantime, I got one for you, and that is, you ready to go? Thanks.
Thank you, George. So George, just to recap one question here for you, is there an FAA certification process or anything to, I guess, what's the barrier? Can Virgin and Blue fly to space with or without FAA certification?
So under the law, any U.S. citizen or entity that wants to conduct the launch of a launch vehicle, including those with people on board, anywhere in the world, needs to have an FAA license. And the only exception for that is for launches that are being conducted by and for the government. So NASA didn't need an FAA license when they flew the shuttle. Military doesn't need a license when they're doing their mission for national security. But anybody else does need to work with us. And of course, we've got a great partnership right now in working on the Commercial Crew Program with NASA. We're focusing on the public safety aspect. NASA's focusing on the safety of its employees, NASA astronauts, and that partnership is working very well.
And for the spaceflight participants that want to fly on board, they will just need to sign a piece of paper. Is that correct?
So they will have the informed consent that they'll have to agree to. Our requirements in terms of the regulations are very minimal in terms of egress training during emergencies and things like that. We're pretty much relying on the operators to decide what particular screening or medical requirements they want to put in place.
Fantastic. Thank you.
What about a solution that doesn't have a pilot, right? It's fully autonomous. It's just spaceflight participants. Can you have a whole crew of just informed consent and the first bullet about a license? Does that just go away if you don't have that role?
So Blue Origin needs to have the license to do that launch, but there's no requirement to actually have a pilot on board. But if somebody is going to have the ability to change the trajectory, then there's some additional requirements on that person.
Wonderful. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is, anyone remember the dating game way back in the day? All right. I'd like to invite a couple students, representative students that would like to pose a couple questions. We've got some that were selected from the audience. And I'd like to ask also Pam to join me. And we're going to just play a little bit of which company would you want to fly on, right? Which company really, you know, is going to answer some of these hard-hitting questions? So do I have my panelists? Come on up. And actually, can I get 2 chairs? Can I get one more chair? Or maybe just one. Would you mind bringing that up? Fantastic. Yes. So let's set this up. We're going to have you guys sit here. All right. No. We have to face them. No. So this is like, you know, you have to like judge them here. All right. Let's get this set up. Okay. All right. Here we go. Come on. You're on this side now. I'm rearranging. Okay. This is what I do in my house all the time. All right, so I want you to lead, and these are our different companies here, and including George's is in this mix as well. And so we want to date one of them and ask them which company, you know, would you like to fly on, and ask them sort of hard-hitting questions for them. So I'd like each of you guys to ask one question, and I'm going to have you start.
Okay, this is super fun.
This is bachelor number 1. This is bachelorette number 2, bachelor number 3, bachelor number 4, and bachelor number 5. Okay, please go.
So this is really awesome because as an astronaut, I guess get asked a variant of this question all the time, and now I get to ask it. When I worked for George and we were working on those guidelines and recommendations for human spaceflight, one of the things that we struggled with is that all of these companies are talking about extremely different time frames, from minutes to, Fergie, I don't know how long it takes to get to the station, but what the crew is in the vehicle for maybe 10 hours before they get to the station, something like that?
6 to 24.
6 to 24, okay. And then obviously, Tony, you were talking about, you know, days, weeks, and so forth. And so as we were talking about those recommended guidelines, one of the things that we really struggled with was the habitability requirements. You know, what does the average person need to be physically healthy in certain bodily functions? So my question is, what toilet facilities do you have planned, and how long do people have to go to wait? In other words, maybe you've made the decision, it's a short flight, you know, go before you launch, and we're going to save the wait, we don't need a potty, so forth. Or maybe it's really okay, it's more like camping, Fergie, I don't know what kind of facilities you might offer. And Tony, I really hope you can answer this question, because when it becomes weeks, it's going to be a really big deal. So please, let's
the potty in space question. Fabulous.
We have many things to offer, but a good commode is not one of them. So there will not be a bathroom or a shower, for that matter, on the spaceship.
New Shepard is pretty straightforward. At 11 minutes, we're going to load you onto the capsule about 30 minutes in advance of the flight, plus your flight of about 10 minutes. We think you guys will do just fine during that period without any facilities.
We can't say that, can we? So 6 to 24 hours. All right, since you took the conversation south very quickly, Pam, let's go there. First, let's talk about human digestion, right? And we have number 1 and we have number 2, right? Human digestion really doesn't, it gets very confused when you go into orbit, so it will shut down and get very quiet for a long period of time. So we believe in our hearts that the number 2 portion of this activity is nothing to be worried about. By the time you get to the International Space Station, you'll have a nice warm toilet that you can use while you're there. With regard to, but we do provide for that, right? There is a provision for it in the form of the way that the Apollo crew did with it, right? Apollo bags, they used to call them, and for those of you out there Wikipediaing this, go look up an Apollo bag, and it's a very interesting discussion. But as far as urination is concerned, right, that's clearly got to happen. We do not have a toilet. However, we intend to use an ISS equivalent. It's like I don't want to call it a catheter, but it does draw the urine away from your body. We will wear a diaper for ascent and entry, but if you don't like to use a diaper while you're in orbit, we'll have a place for you to go to the bathroom, and it will be stored odor-free and leak-free in a container that will be deposited with the permission of the International Space Station program with them as a little present when we arrive. And the same for the reverse trip.
I guess it's always good to bring a gift if you're showing up at somebody's house. I thought it was polite. Yeah, so for, the early exploration missions, NASA, astronauts, at some point international partners, Orion spacecraft, going to Deep Space Gateway, 30-day kind of missions initially, and then building up to this 3-year journey to Mars and back. So yeah, hold it's not one of the answers. So the same ascent entry suits from a NASA perspective, the ACES, they've got a modified version, but very similar. It just has some increased capability. But for this question, the same, a diaper on the way up and the way back. And then the Orion toilet, not just being functional, it needs to be reliable, right? This is a critical piece of equipment. Whether it's humorous or not, it's one of the critical pieces of equipment. And so we, in collaboration with the International Space Station program, of course all NASA, is testing today the reliability of the toilet that we will use on the Orion spacecraft. So it's one thing to build it, design it well, test it on the Earth. We're actually doing the 0G long duration exposure testing on the International Space Station today.
So in addition to fixing your bike, you're going to have to fix the potty.
Absolutely.
And today there currently are no FAA regulations on waste management systems. However, if you skim through those recommended practices for human spaceflight occupant safety, you will find that as one of the topics for things that should be thought through depending on your vehicle and your mission.
And Pambo, you'll be forever remembered as the first person on a first date to bring up how do you go to the bathroom.
So I'm Jessica, I'm Australian, and my question is for Bachelor number 1 and 2. I'm looking to buy a family pass on one of your spacecraft, but I want to bring my 7-year-old grandmother and my 5-year-old niece. So I'm wondering what kind of selection criteria there will be for commercial, tourists, basically.
I think we can accommodate your 7-year-old grandmother, but I'm afraid the 5-year-old niece will have to stay home for a few years. I think you have to be, George, remind me, it's 18 to fly?
Yeah, 18.
18 to fly. So other than that, as long as she's healthy, we'd love to have her.
So why is that? Is because lawyers have thought about this and decided if you're going to give informed consent, then you need to be of the age that can make that kind of a decision. So don't anticipate that that's going to be the way it always is, but for right now, as we're trying this out, that's where we are.
I would think as many people as raise their hand for wanting to ride on a rocket, I think if you are able to sign an informed consent, you should be able to derive the basic rocket equation from first principles, or you're really not informed.
Oh, no, so this is what we mean by normal people. You see, we don't want to have math on the exam.
So, batch number 2?
It's the same response. We would love to take your 70-year-old grandmother. Unfortunately, the 5-year-old is going to have to wait a couple of years. But for your 7-year-old grandmother, again, we have made a lot of developments in the capsule to make sure that she will not just enjoy the ride, but really do well and take in all that our flight has to offer. So.
And providing daycare for the 5-year-old while we're up there?
We'll talk. That's part of the grander experience, sure.
Hello, my name is João Losada. I'm from Portugal and now living in Germany. My question is for bachelor number 3 and 4. And I want you to think back before you had your first flight and think that you today had the choice to fly either Starliner or Orion. Which one would you choose and why?
The answer is actually simple. They're both built to NASA's very exacting standards, and NASA would not accept them for services unless they made it all the way through the verification process that ensures that they're certified for safe for human flight. So I'd fly on either one.
Yeah, and the only difference is where would you get to go, right? Since I was young, have always wanted to step foot on Mars. So, I would choose Orion not from worrying about the safety aspects, but from a getting to journey out into deep space.
Chris, that was not really an answer, was it?
Well, it depends what the mission is, right? The mission is to go to low Earth orbit. I'll take a Starliner any day of the week. I too would love to go to Mars, though.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carmen Felix. I'm originally from Mexico, living in the Netherlands. My question is for Bachelor 1 and 5. So many of us here would like to go to space, right? But Tony was mentioning how many would like to go back, right, safely. So my question goes related to safety, which is a very important topic in space tourism. Regarding the accident that happened in 2014 with the Spaceship Two, how will you convince just your customers about the safety of the spaceship? And also, I would like your point of view related to reliability and redundancy of your systems on board.
That's a great question. So the accident, which was covered by our National Transportation Safety Board in exhaustive detail, and the hundreds and hundreds of papers, hundreds and hundreds of pages about the accident are available online if you want to go look at it. But the vehicle was operating absolutely flawlessly at the time of the accident. It was tragically an operator made a mistake. I think the NTSB pointed out that any mistake is a combination of a human being and the machine letting the human being take that action. So we did respond, and in the redesign, we have prevented that accident from happening again. But again, it gets back to the fundamental issue of understanding the level of risk. This is not like going on a long, pleasant sea cruise. This is like climbing, right now, the space flight is in such a state that this is like climbing a mountain, right? This is a task that you should take, a journey that you should take with your eyes open, and you should be apprised of all the risks. And astronauts have years and years of training. What George is trying to put in to place is the basic tools that let passengers know the level of risk they're undertaking. So we're going to make the absolute safest vehicle that we can make. But when you're going to space, the difference between the safest you can make and safe is still going to be a considerable distance.
So I think that's a great answer. In our regulations, we do require that the launch operators brief their prospective customers on not only the flight history, number of incidents and accidents and flights and so forth, but also some of the potential hazards. What kinds of things could go wrong and what are the potential consequences of that? So that is required, and they will have an opportunity to ask any questions, and hopefully it won't be deriving the rocket equation, but rather explaining what went wrong or what kinds of things could happen so that you at least go into this with your eyes wide open. It's going to be really exciting, but there's also risk involved, and people need to understand that.
Might I add to that, to a point? So the informed consent, I think it's important, and we also take it very seriously, you can imagine, but it's not just this legal document. You have to write it in English that people understand, and I think that's really important, and I know you take it as seriously as we do. But I think, and we should address the redundancy element in your question. That's also something that we take very seriously at Blue. Should note that, on New Shepard, we build to 2 fault tolerance, right? So any 2 things can go wrong in the hardware, and our customers are still going to be able to return without serious injury. You build safety and backup systems into the system. I hope you all had an opportunity to see our last flight where we tested the escape motor, a solid rocket motor, that got that capsule far and fast away from the booster. These are the types of things that you want to build into the system in advance, understanding that no matter how you build it, it's going to be risky, but it is our responsibility to do what we can to ensure that not only do you have a safe experience, but a fun one as well, which includes having an element of peace of mind going into it. And I should also note that the first passengers on Blue will be, we're going to fly some Blue Origin employees first to make sure. I'm happy to join the test dummy corps up here before we take our passengers up.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. I think we all know that the space sector is a risky thing. And I thank you for the answer about the redundancy, which I think is very important for the passengers and customers to be aware that, of course, can be some mistakes, but there should be redundancy to avoid this mistake to produce a fatal accident, right? So thanks a lot.
Wow, very good. Let's give a round of applause for our bachelors and for our panelists. It's wonderful. I think we can all agree that space is risky, but we're all still dreamers, and we all want to go. So stay there for one moment. I'm taking a selfie, and I'd like all you guys to turn around and be in this. This is going to be a hashtag, what did you call it, Poop? What did you call the bags? Apollo bags. Apollo bags, hashtag Apollo bags. Everyone, 1, 2, 3. All right. Having fun on ISE. Enjoy the rest of your trip, and thank you guys very much. You'll find that these panelists are very accessible. If you have any other follow-on questions, please come up and talk to them, ask them their questions, and visit their websites. Thank you.